Beat me at chess and I'll marry you.
CEO Natalie Frost declared with condescending amusement as she noticed Xavier Grant, the night janitor, pausing to study the ivory chess set positioned on her mahogany desk. Her statement delivered with the kind of intellectual arrogance that assumed a custodial worker could never comprehend the strategic complexity of the game she'd been playing against visiting executives all week. At 37, Xavier had perfected the art of invisible observation that characterized maintenance workers in corporate environments, moving through Pinnacle Publishing's executive floors while overhearing conversations about acquisitions, personnel decisions, and financial irregularities that executives discussed freely around someone they considered intellectually irrelevant to their strategic planning. "Ms. Frost, are you serious about that challenge?" Xavier asked quietly, his voice carrying the careful politeness that custodial employees used when acknowledging executive communications that weren't explicitly intended for their participation. Natalie looked up from the financial reports she'd been reviewing with surprise that quickly shifted to entertained superiority. At 34, she possessed the kind of striking blonde beauty and razor-sharp intellect that had intimidated competitors throughout her rise to CEO of one of America's largest publishing conglomerates. Though her success had also cultivated an arrogance about her intellectual superiority that made her dismissive of anyone outside her elite academic and professional circles. "I'm absolutely serious," Natalie replied, her tone mixing amusement with the kind of performative confidence that executives used when making statements they believed carried no real risk. "I've been playing chess since I was 5 years old, competed at Harvard, and haven't lost a game to anyone in this building in over 2 years. And if I were to win, you would actually honor that marriage proposal?" Xavier asked, his question both respectful and subtly challenging, suggesting a level of strategic thinking that didn't match Natalie's assumptions about custodial workers' intellectual capabilities. "Mr. Natalie began, realizing she didn't know the name of the janitor who was apparently taking her chess challenge seriously. "Grant. Xavier Grant. Mr. Grant, I'm confident enough in my chess abilities to honor any arrangement we make, but I should warn you that I've defeated corporate executives, visiting dignitaries, and several semi-professional players who thought they could humble the arrogant CEO," Natalie said, her voice carrying the kind of competitive edge that had characterized her approach to business negotiations and intellectual challenges throughout her career. Xavier studied the board position with the analytical attention that had once made him one of the youngest international masters in competitive chess before scandal had destroyed his career and forced him into employment that concealed rather than celebrated his strategic genius. The current game showed a Queen's Gambit opening that had transitioned into a complex middle game requiring positional understanding that most amateur players couldn't navigate effectively. From the piece placement, Xavier could reconstruct the entire game sequence and identify multiple tactical opportunities that Natalie's previous opponent had missed. "Ms. Frost, would you prefer to finish this current game or start a fresh position?" Xavier asked, his question revealing familiarity with chess etiquette that suggested more sophisticated understanding than Natalie had expected from someone whose job involved emptying trash cans and mopping floors. "Let's start fresh so I can give you my full attention," Natalie replied, clearing the board with the confident efficiency of someone who expected to demonstrate intellectual superiority within 15 or 20 moves. "Would you prefer white or black pieces?" Xavier asked as he began setting up the standard starting position with the precise movements that characterized someone who had arranged chess pieces thousands of times in competitive environments. "I'll take white and the first move advantage," Natalie said, settling into her executive chair with the anticipation of someone about to deliver an educational chess lesson to an overconfident opponent. 9-year-old Riley would be waking in 5 hours, expecting help with her advanced mathematics homework and breakfast conversation about strategic problem-solving, unaware that her father was about to demonstrate the chess mastery he'd been concealing since her birth to protect her from the disappointment and public humiliation that had ended his competitive career. The game began with Natalie's confident king's pawn opening, followed by standard developmental moves that showed solid understanding of chess principles but lacked the tactical creativity that separated strong club players from masters who could visualize combinations 20 moves deep. "Interesting choice," Xavier commented after Natalie's fifth move, his observation both polite and subtly analytical, suggesting he was evaluating her strategic approach rather than simply reacting to individual moves. "Are you familiar with this opening system?" Natalie asked, beginning to notice that Xavier's responses showed pattern recognition and positional understanding that exceeded her expectations for casual chess knowledge. "I've seen similar positions before," Xavier replied carefully, avoiding details about his background while developing his pieces with the methodical precision that had once characterized his preparation for international tournaments. By the 10th move, Natalie realized she was facing an opponent whose tactical vision and positional judgment were significantly more sophisticated than anyone she'd encountered in corporate chess challenges. Xavier's piece coordination and pawn structure suggested systematic chess education that contradicted everything she'd assumed about his intellectual background. "Mr. Grant, have you studied chess seriously?" Natalie asked, her voice carrying growing respect, mixed with puzzlement about how a janitor had developed master-level understanding of strategic principles. "I've read some chess books and played online occasionally," Xavier replied, using deliberately modest language to deflect attention from expertise that could expose him to questions about his employment situation and professional history. The decisive moment came on move 17, when Xavier sacrificed his queen in a combination that Natalie couldn't immediately calculate, forcing her to choose between accepting material advantage or recognizing that deeper tactical threats made the sacrifice sound. That's checkmate in 4 moves, regardless of how I respond," Natalie said after studying the position for several minutes, her voice carrying the stunned disbelief of someone discovering that her intellectual confidence had been based on incomplete information about her opponent's capabilities. "Yes, ma'am, though you played an excellent game up to this point," Xavier replied, with the gracious victory manner that had characterized his behavior during competitive chess, before arrogance and poor sportsmanship from rivals had contributed to the fabricated scandal that ended his career. Natalie stared at the board with growing recognition that she had just been defeated by someone whose strategic thinking exceeded her own, despite his working as a custodial employee in her building. "Mr. Grant, that was master-level play," Natalie said, her tone shifting from competitive dismissal to genuine curiosity about how she'd completely misjudged his intellectual capabilities. "Where did you learn to play chess at that level?" "I had good teachers when I was younger," Xavier replied carefully, though his chest was tightening with anxiety about revealing background information that could lead to uncomfortable questions about his current employment circumstances. "How good were these teachers? Because what I just witnessed was significantly more sophisticated than casual instruction or online learning could produce." Xavier felt trapped between honesty about his qualifications and protection of the emotional boundaries that had kept his past humiliation from affecting his ability to provide stable support for Riley during the years since his chess career had ended in professional disgrace. "Ms. Frost, I used to play competitively before I needed to focus on other priorities," Xavier said, using the euphemistic language he'd developed for describing career destruction without providing details that could trigger painful memories or unwanted sympathy. "What level of competitive play?" Natalie pressed, her executive instincts recognizing that she was receiving incomplete information about something that could fundamentally alter her understanding of talent recognition and professional assumptions. "I was an international master before I stopped competing," Xavier replied, his admission both liberating and terrifying since it revealed achievements that contradicted everything about his current employment status. The revelation hung in the office air like a challenge to everything Natalie thought she understood about intelligence, achievement, and the reliability of social indicators for measuring human capability. "An international master," Natalie repeated, processing information that suggested the person she'd been treating as intellectually inferior possessed chess credentials that fewer than 1,000 people worldwide had achieved. "Yes, ma'am, though that was several years ago and I haven't maintained the competitive level that title requires." As their unexpected chess match concluded with implications neither had anticipated, both Xavier and Natalie understood that the game had exposed questions about talent, recognition, and the assumptions people made about intelligence based on job titles rather than actual capabilities. Some discoveries require confronting uncomfortable truths about how society distributes respect and opportunity, and sometimes the most brilliant minds are concealed by circumstances that have nothing to do with intellectual capacity and everything to do with how systemic barriers can bury genius in positions where it remains invisible until moment of revelation makes denial impossible. The investigation that would unravel both their lives began at 7 a.m. the following morning, when Natalie arrived at Pinnacle Publishing carrying comprehensive research about Xavier Grant's chess career and a growing understanding of how professional scandal could destroy qualified individuals regardless of their actual guilt or innocence. "Mr. Grant," Natalie said, finding Xavier in the building's archive room where he was organizing cleaning supplies while processing the psychological aftermath of revealing chess expertise he'd been suppressing for 6 years to protect himself and Riley from continued public humiliation. "I spent most of the night researching your competitive history." Xavier felt the familiar anxiety spike that accompanied any inquiry into his professional background, uncertain whether Natalie's investigation indicated genuine interest in his capabilities or concern about employing someone whose chess career had ended in cheating allegations that had never been formally disproven. "Ms. Frost, I understand that my background raises questions about my current employment situation," Xavier replied, using the careful language he'd developed for addressing potential concerns about his professional reliability, while maintaining emotional boundaries that kept painful memories from overwhelming his psychological stability. "Mr. Grant, you weren't just an international master," Natalie said, her voice carrying the focused attention that characterized executives processing information that fundamentally altered their understanding of people and situations. "You were ranked among the top 50 chess players in the world before allegations ended your competitive career." The recognition was both validating and devastating, confirming that Natalie now understood his chess achievements while potentially exposing him to scrutiny about why someone with international recognition was working in custodial services 6 years later. "Yes, ma'am, that's accurate. But I also need you to understand that those allegations destroyed my ability to secure sponsorship or participate in tournaments, which made professional chess impossible to continue as a career," Xavier explained, his honesty about career destruction both personally vulnerable and professionally necessary. "What specific allegations ended your competitive participation?" Natalie asked, her tone carrying business-like directness rather than judgment, suggesting she was seeking information for evaluation rather than moral condemnation. The question required Xavier to revisit the most painful period of his professional life, when doing nothing wrong had resulted in systematic character assassination that had forced him to choose between fighting for vindication and providing stable support for his daughter during her early childhood years. "I was accused of using electronic assistance during the World Championship semi-finals," Xavier said, his voice carrying controlled emotion about circumstances that had made defending his integrity feel impossible despite the accusations being completely fabricated. Electronic assistance in chess typically involves hidden computers or communication devices that provide analytical support during games. The allegations suggested that my tactical improvements over several months were too dramatic to be natural development. Natalie processed this information with growing recognition that professional success could be destroyed through accusations that were difficult to disprove, especially in competitive environments where rivals had motivation to eliminate talented competitors through character assassination rather than superior performance. "Mr. Grant, were you actually using electronic assistance?" Natalie asked directly, her executive experience with personnel issues making her comfortable with straightforward questions about potentially sensitive topics. "No, ma'am, I never cheated in any form during my competitive career," Xavier replied, with the clarity that came from absolute certainty about his own integrity. The tactical improvements that seemed suspicious were the result of intensive training with a new coach who specialized in pattern recognition and combinational vision. "Then why weren't you able to clear your reputation through investigation or appeal processes?" "Because the person who made the allegations was Jonathan Blackwell, who had financial incentives for my elimination from competition and professional connections that made his accusations credible to tournament organizers who didn't want to risk their events being associated with cheating scandals." The explanation revealed systematic corruption disguised as legitimate concern for competitive integrity, suggesting that Xavier's career destruction had been orchestrated rather than resulting from genuine evidence of wrongdoing. "Jonathan Blackwell?" Natalie repeated, her tone indicating recognition of the name from contexts unrelated to chess competition. "Yes, ma'am. He was a master-level player who competed in the same tournaments, but he was also developing business interests in chess publishing and tournament organization that would benefit from eliminating top-level competition." "Ms. Frost, do you know Jonathan Blackwell personally?" Natalie's expression shifted to controlled concern as she processed that the person who had destroyed Xavier's chess career was the same individual who now served as editor-in-chief of Pinnacle Publishing's most profitable division. "Jonathan is one of my senior executives," Natalie replied carefully. "He's been with the company for 4 years and has been instrumental in our chess book publishing and tournament sponsorship programs." The revelation created immediate tension between Natalie's loyalty to a trusted employee and growing evidence that Jonathan's professional history included systematic sabotage of competitors for personal financial gain. "Ms. Frost, I should mention that my position as your custodial employee has given me access to information about Jonathan's current business practices that might be relevant to your evaluation of his character and professional ethics." "What kind of information?" Xavier hesitated, recognizing that sharing his observations about editorial fraud and financial misconduct would expose Jonathan's current criminal activities while potentially creating retaliation that could affect both his employment and Riley's stability. "Over the past 2 years, I've observed patterns in document disposal and overheard conversations that suggest systematic manipulation of book sales figures, fraudulent tournament sponsorship arrangements, and embezzlement of funds designated for author royalties. The accusations were both serious and professionally dangerous, suggesting that Xavier's invisible position had provided him with evidence of crimes that could result in federal prosecution while making him a witness whose testimony could destroy careers and reputations. Mr. Grant, those are criminal allegations that would require substantial evidence to pursue through legal channels, Natalie replied, though her voice carried growing concern about the possibility that her trusted executive was stealing from the company while using his position to eliminate business competitors. I understand the seriousness of what I'm suggesting, but my chess background gives me pattern recognition skills that most people don't possess, and the financial irregularities I've observed follow systematic approaches that suggest coordinated fraud rather than accounting errors. Meanwhile, 9-year-old Riley was experiencing her own curiosity about her father's sudden change in mood and behavior following his chess game with Natalie, recognizing that something significant had occurred despite his attempts to minimize the importance of revealing his competitive background. "Dad, you seem different since you played chess with your boss," Riley observed during their morning breakfast routine, her emotional intelligence recognizing that her father was processing psychological stress related to his professional identity. "Are you worried about something?" At 9, Riley possessed strategic thinking abilities that had already exceeded age-level expectations in mathematics and logic games, though she'd learned not to discuss her father's chess expertise with teachers or classmates who didn't understand why someone so intelligent would work in custodial services. "I'm not worried, sweetheart, but playing chess with Ms. Frost reminded me of when I used to compete professionally, and that brings back complicated feelings about choices I made to prioritize taking care of you," Xavier replied, using honest communication while protecting Riley from details about career destruction and ongoing vulnerability. "Dad, are you thinking about playing chess again, instead of cleaning buildings?" Riley asked, her question revealing both hope that her father might return to work that utilized his intelligence and concern that career changes could disrupt the financial stability they'd built together. "I don't know, baby. Chess competition requires travel and stress that would make it difficult for me to be the kind of father you need. But maybe there are other ways to use chess skills that would be better for our family." Gakuhi, as Xavier prepared to make decisions about whether to expose Jonathan Blackwell's criminal activities while risking retaliation that could affect Riley's security, he realized that some moral choices required weighing personal safety against justice for people who had been victimized by systematic fraud disguised as legitimate business operations. "Ms. Frost, if I were to provide you with detailed information about Jonathan's fraudulent activities, I would need assurances about protection from professional retaliation and legal support if my testimony results in federal investigation," Xavier said during their follow-up meeting. "What kind of protection and support would you need?" "Employment security that doesn't depend on Jonathan's continued approval, legal representation if my whistleblowing creates criminal liability for me as a witness, and financial assistance if retaliation makes my current position untenable." Some moral choices require accepting that exposing institutional corruption often destroys the lives of people who possess inconvenient knowledge about criminal activities, and that the most ethical response may involve protecting witnesses rather than pursuing justice when protection systems are inadequate for ensuring their safety. 3 weeks after accepting Natalie's consulting arrangement to investigate Jonathan Blackwell's editorial fraud, Xavier found himself experiencing the psychological vertigo that came from returning to strategic analysis work that required the same pattern recognition skills that had once made him a world-class chess player, while simultaneously confronting evidence of systematic financial crimes that could result in federal prosecution and inevitable retaliation against anyone who threatened Jonathan's criminal empire. "Dad, you're doing that thing again where you stare at papers like they're chess puzzles," 9-year-old Riley observed from across their small kitchen table, where she was working on geometric proofs while monitoring her father's emotional state with the intuitive precision that children develop when they become primary support systems for parents navigating professional stress. Riley, I'm analyzing some complicated business documents that require the same kind of thinking I used to use for chess competitions, Xavier replied, though his voice carried tension that indicated he was processing information that could fundamentally alter their family's circumstances in ways that might not be entirely positive. The consulting work with Pinnacle Publishing had provided Xavier with intellectual stimulation and additional income they desperately needed, but it had also exposed him to Jonathan Blackwell's sophisticated criminal operations that included money laundering through fake book sales, embezzlement of author royalties, and systematic tax fraud that could total millions of dollars over the past 4 years. "Dad, are you going to get in trouble like you did when you played chess professionally?" Riley asked, her question revealing mature understanding of the connection between her father's analytical work and the career destruction they had both experienced when she was 3 years old. The directness of her inquiry forced Xavier to acknowledge that his daughter remembered more about their family's economic collapse than he'd been comfortable admitting, even to himself. "Riley, what I'm doing now is different because I'm helping catch people who are stealing money rather than competing against them in games," Xavier explained, using age-appropriate language while avoiding details about criminal investigation that would be inappropriate for a child to carry. "But you're right that using my analytical skills sometimes creates stress that affects our family." The conversation was taking place at 11:30 p.m. on a Thursday evening after Xavier had completed his custodial shift and spent 3 additional hours documenting Jonathan's fraudulent activities through financial records that had been carelessly discarded in executive trash bins over the past 2 years. "Mr. Grant," Natalie had said during their consultation meeting earlier that day, "the evidence you've gathered about Jonathan's embezzlement is more extensive than I anticipated. Are we looking at individual fraud or systematic criminal enterprise? Ms. Frost, what we're looking at appears to be coordinated racketeering that uses legitimate publishing operations to launder money from multiple criminal sources while systematically stealing from authors, tournament sponsors, and corporate shareholders," Xavier had replied, his analysis based on pattern recognition skills that allowed him to identify financial schemes that most executives would need forensic accountants to detect. The book sales manipulation alone represents approximately $3.2 million in fraudulent revenue reporting over the past 2 years, while the tournament sponsorship embezzlement involves an additional $1.8 million that was designated for prize funds and operational expenses, but was diverted to offshore accounts under Jonathan's control. The revelation had been both professionally alarming and personally dangerous, confirming Xavier's expertise while exposing him to exactly the kind of high-stakes criminal investigation that could result in witness intimidation or elimination by people whose previous responses to exposure had included violence against inconvenient investigators. "Xavier, what are the legal implications if we report this evidence to federal authorities?" Natalie had asked, her voice carrying controlled fear about discovering that her trusted executive was stealing from the company while using his position to eliminate business competitors through character assassination. "If we can document our findings properly and report them through appropriate channels, we should have whistleblower protection under federal statutes," Xavier had explained, drawing on research he'd conducted about legal safeguards for people who expose corporate crime. "But if Jonathan realizes we're investigating him, both of our families could face retaliation that includes professional sabotage and personal intimidation. The warning had forced both of them to confront that their collaboration involved risks that affected their children's safety as well as their own professional futures, particularly given Jonathan's demonstrated willingness to destroy careers through fabricated allegations and systematic character assassination. Now, as Xavier continued his analysis, while Riley worked on homework that showcased mathematical abilities far exceeding grade-level expectations, he was discovering financial connections that suggested Jonathan's criminal network included corrupt officials in chess organizations, publishing industry regulators, and federal agencies that were supposed to prevent exactly the kinds of fraud he was perpetrating. "Dad," Riley said, looking up from her geometry problems, "if the bad person you're investigating finds out what you're doing, will he try to hurt our reputation like the chess people did when I was little?" The question revealed that Riley understood more about their previous family crisis than Xavier had realized she'd processed at 3 years old, including the connection between professional reputation destruction and economic vulnerability. "Riley, that's possible, but this time I'm working with Ms. Frost to make sure we have legal protection and proper documentation that would make it harder for anyone to attack our credibility," Xavier replied, though his voice carried uncertainty about whether legal protections would be sufficient defense against criminal organizations with resources for systematic retaliation. "But you don't know for sure that we'll be safe from people who want to stop you from catching thieves, do you?" Riley pressed, her emotional intelligence making it impossible for her father to provide false reassurance about dangers she was sophisticated enough to recognize. "No, sweetheart, I can't guarantee complete safety, but I can guarantee that I'll do everything possible to protect you while also preventing innocent people from losing money because of fraud I could have helped expose," Xavier admitted, using honest communication that had characterized their relationship since they'd been forced to depend entirely on each other. 3 days later, Xavier's investigation reached crisis point when he discovered that Jonathan had been monitoring Natalie's business communications and was aware that Pinnacle Publishing was conducting internal investigation of his financial activities. "Natalie, Jonathan knows we're investigating him," Xavier said during their emergency meeting at a secure location away from Pinnacle's potentially compromised offices. "I found evidence that he's been intercepting your corporate emails and tracking our research into his criminal operations." The discovery meant that their investigation had moved from covert analysis to active counter-surveillance by criminal organization with sophisticated intelligence capabilities and demonstrated willingness to eliminate threats through character destruction or worse. "What kind of evidence?" Natalie asked, her voice tight with recognition that their collaboration had escalated beyond corporate consulting into potential federal criminal case requiring law enforcement protection. "Email metadata showing that copies of our correspondence have been forwarded to accounts controlled by Jonathan's associates, and financial records indicating that he's hired private investigators to conduct background checks on both of us and our families." The revelation meant that Riley's school records, medical information, and daily routines were potentially being monitored by people whose previous responses to investigation had included systematic career destruction and personal intimidation designed to silence inconvenient witnesses. "Xavier, what do we do now?" Natalie asked, understanding that their investigation had moved beyond corporate management into confrontation with criminal network that possessed resources for retaliation extending far beyond employment termination. "We document everything we've discovered, report it simultaneously to the FBI and Securities Exchange Commission, and prepare for retaliation that could include attempts to discredit our findings through the same character assassination techniques Jonathan used to destroy my chess career," Xavier replied. "What about our families? We request federal witness protection evaluation and implement personal security measures that assume Jonathan will attempt both economic and personal retaliation against anyone who threatens his criminal operations. As they prepared comprehensive documentation for federal authorities while implementing security protocols that would affect their children's daily routines and long-term living arrangements, both Xavier and Natalie understood that their investigation had moved from business consultation into life-altering confrontation with criminal organization whose resources exceeded their ability to protect themselves independently. "Riley," Xavier said that evening, as they prepared for what might be their last normal bedtime routine for months, "tomorrow we're going to start staying with Ms. Frost and her security team while some important legal matters get resolved. Dad, are we in danger because you decided to help good people instead of ignoring bad people again?" Riley asked, her question revealing mature understanding of ethical patterns and their consequences. "Yes, baby, but we're in danger because bad people don't want anyone to stop them from stealing money and hurting other families, not because helping people is wrong," Xavier replied. "Will the police be able to catch the bad people this time so they can't hurt anyone else?" Riley asked, with 9-year-old hopefulness about justice systems that had previously failed to protect their family from systematic persecution. "I don't know for certain, but we're going to do everything we can to help them have the evidence they need to stop the stealing and make sure other families don't lose their money like we lost everything when I was accused of cheating. Some sacrifices require accepting that protecting others often involves exposing your own family to dangers that most people never have to face. And sometimes the price of integrity includes uncertainty about whether courage will be rewarded with justice or punished through retaliation by systems designed to protect those who challenge institutional corruption." 6 weeks after federal agents had arrested Jonathan Blackwell on charges of racketeering, money laundering, and conspiracy to commit fraud, Dr. Evelyn Martinez arrived at Pinnacle Publishing for what Natalie had described as an organizational psychology consultation, but which represented the first comprehensive evaluation of corporate culture and decision-making processes that the company had ever undertaken. "Mr. Grant," Dr. Martinez said as she entered the secure conference room where Xavier was reviewing financial documentation under FBI witness protection, "I've been following your case since the federal prosecution began, and I wanted to discuss how your pattern recognition abilities could inform corporate fraud prevention training." Dr. Martinez, an organizational psychologist who specialized in strategic thinking and decision-making analysis, carried herself with the professional authority that came from years of helping companies recognize cognitive biases and systematic vulnerabilities that made them susceptible to internal fraud and manipulation. "Dr. Martinez, I appreciate your interest, but I want to be clear that my situation is still developing, and I can't make commitments about consulting or training until the federal investigation is complete," Xavier replied, his voice carrying the careful restraint he'd learned for managing public exposure while under witness protection. "Actually, Mr. Grant, I'm here because the FBI has requested that I help Pinnacle Publishing develop fraud detection protocols that could prevent similar criminal operations in the future," Dr. Martinez explained, settling into her chair with materials that suggested she'd already reviewed extensive documentation about Jonathan's criminal enterprise. "They've also asked me to evaluate whether your analytical methods could be systematized for broader corporate risk assessment." The revelation meant that Xavier's investigation techniques were being considered for replication across multiple companies rather than treated as isolated incident requiring individual expertise to address. "What kind of systematic risk assessment are they considering?" Natalie asked, her tone carrying strategic curiosity that indicated she was processing information that could affect industry-wide compliance standards. Mandatory strategic thinking training for senior executives, automated monitoring systems for detecting financial manipulation patterns, and standardized due diligence protocols that would make sophisticated fraud schemes more difficult to conceal as legitimate business operations, Dr. Martinez replied. The comprehensive approach represented recognition that preventing corporate crime required institutional changes rather than just individual vigilance from occasional whistleblowers who happened to possess relevant expertise. Over the following 2 hours, Dr. Martinez presented findings from her preliminary assessment of how Jonathan's fraud had succeeded initially and how Xavier's analysis had identified criminal patterns that traditional corporate oversight had missed. Your company's standard financial monitoring focused on revenue totals, expense categories, and profit margins, Dr. Martinez continued, but didn't include analysis of transaction patterns, vendor relationships, or behavioral indicators that would have revealed systematic manipulation disguised as normal business operations. What you're describing sounds like the kind of forensic analysis that would require specialized training and significant resources, Natalie observed, recognizing potential obstacles to implementing comprehensive fraud prevention. That's exactly right, which is why federal agencies are interested in developing training programs that could make basic pattern recognition accessible to executives who don't have Mr. Grant's chess background and strategic analysis capabilities, Dr. Martinez replied. The conversation was interrupted by Riley's arrival from the on-site tutoring session that had replaced her regular school attendance during the witness protection period, accompanied by 2 other children whose parents were also involved in the federal investigation. "Dad," Riley said, approaching with the combination of relief and caution that characterized children living under security protection. "The FBI lady said we might be able to go back to normal school next week if all the bad people stay in jail." At 9, Riley had adapted to witness protection with the resilience that children display when their primary caregiver remains calm and present, though she developed strategic thinking about safety and security that exceeded age-appropriate concerns. "That's the plan, sweetheart," Xavier replied, though his voice carried uncertainty about whether Jonathan's arrest had eliminated all threats to their family's safety. "We're waiting for confirmation that all the dangerous people have been arrested and can't hurt anyone else. Mr. Grant," Dr. Martinez said, observing this father-daughter interaction, "how has the witness protection experience affected your family's daily life and long-term planning?" "It's provided necessary security, but it's also isolated Riley from her normal social environment and created anxiety about stability that she shouldn't have to carry at 9 years old," Xavier replied honestly. "Dr. Martinez?" Riley said with the directness that characterized children who'd learned to advocate for their family's needs. "My dad is really good at finding patterns that show when people are lying about money, but living with security guards is scary, and I want to go home." Ooh. The observation revealed that even successful witness protection created psychological costs for children whose sense of security depended on routine and predictability rather than professional validation for their parents' courage. "Riley, we're working to make sure that your family can return to normal life as quickly as possible, while also helping other companies protect themselves from the kind of stealing that hurts so many people," Dr. Martinez replied, her tone acknowledging that witness protection was temporary necessity rather than permanent lifestyle. Meanwhile, Natalie was experiencing her own transformation through the federal investigation that had exposed how Jonathan's systematic fraud had been concealed through exactly the kind of intellectual arrogance and assumption-making that had initially led her to underestimate Xavier's capabilities. "Dr. Martinez," Natalie said as their consultation continued, "what I've learned through this experience is that my confidence in traditional executive evaluation and oversight practices was dangerously naive. I had no idea that someone I trusted could be stealing millions while using their position to destroy competitors through character assassination. Ms. Frost, most executives receive training in financial management and personnel oversight, but very few receive education about recognizing systematic fraud or criminal infiltration of legitimate business operations, Dr. Martinez replied. That gap in executive education is why criminal operations like Jonathan's can successfully target even sophisticated companies. The explanation provided context for understanding Natalie's victimization as systematic educational failure rather than individual incompetence, while highlighting the need for strategic thinking training that addressed criminal psychology rather than just regulatory compliance. What kind of training would have helped me recognize the patterns that Mr. Grant identified immediately? Natalie asked. Strategic pattern recognition, behavioral analysis techniques, and systematic thinking about how criminal operations disguise themselves as normal business activities, Dr. Martinez replied. Essentially the same analytical methods that Mr. Grant used, but systematized for executives without chess mastery or specialized investigative background. As their alliance solidified around developing fraud prevention protocols that could protect other companies from sophisticated internal crime, all three adults recognized that Xavier's individual expertise needed to be institutionalized rather than relied upon for future crisis intervention. Xavier, Natalie said, as their planning session concluded, I want to offer you a permanent position as Chief Strategy Officer, with responsibility for developing and implementing the fraud prevention protocols we've been discussing. The offer was both generous recognition of his contributions and acknowledgement that preventing corporate crime required dedicated expertise, rather than occasional consultation from custodial workers who happen to possess relevant knowledge. Natalie, I'm honored by the offer, but I need to consider how a high-profile executive role might affect Riley's safety and our ability to maintain the stable family life that witness protection was designed to preserve, Xavier replied. What kind of considerations are you thinking about? Public visibility as a strategy officer could make me a target for other criminal organizations who want to discourage pattern recognition expertise that threatens their operations, and career advancement based on my whistleblowing history could create expectations for future risk-taking that might not be compatible with responsible parenting. The concerns were both practical and profound, reflecting recognition that professional success based on exposing criminal activity could create ongoing vulnerability for families who needed security more than recognition. Xavier, what if we could structure the strategy role to provide meaningful work and appropriate compensation while maintaining privacy protections and security measures that prioritize your family's well-being? Dr. Martinez suggested. That might be possible, but I'd need explicit agreements about limiting public exposure and maintaining FBI consultation for any investigations that could involve organized criminal activity, Xavier replied. As they negotiated terms for collaboration that could transform individual courage into institutional change, all participants understood that their success would be measured not just by preventing future fraud at Pinnacle Publishing, but by creating strategic analysis models that could protect multiple companies from sophisticated criminal infiltration. Some alliances require recognizing that individual expertise becomes most valuable when it's shared systematically rather than hoarded privately, and that the most effective protection against institutional corruption involves collaborative education rather than reliance on exceptional individuals who happen to possess relevant analytical capabilities. The retaliation began when Jonathan Blackwell's criminal associates orchestrated a coordinated campaign to destroy Xavier's credibility by reviving the chess cheating allegations with fabricated new evidence. while simultaneously targeting Riley through cyberbullying and threats designed to force Xavier to withdraw his federal testimony before the grand jury could issue expanded indictments for racketeering and conspiracy to commit murder. "Dad, someone posted pictures of me online with mean comments about how my father is a cheater and a liar," Riley said from her bedroom doorway, holding her tablet with the devastating expression of a 9-year-old discovering that adult criminal behavior could reach into her personal life through social media harassment that her classmates would inevitably see. Xavier immediately activated the emergency protocols he'd hoped never to use again, contacting FBI handlers while implementing digital security measures that drew on painful experience with systematic character assassination campaigns designed to isolate witnesses and destroy their psychological resilience. "Riley, the people doing this are trying to hurt me by making you feel bad, but nothing they're saying about our family is true," Xavier said, using the calm authority he'd learned during their previous crisis to provide reassurance while managing his own rage about criminals targeting his daughter. The cyber attacks had escalated beyond simple intimidation to sophisticated psychological warfare that included fake social media profiles claiming to be former chess competitors who confirmed Xavier's cheating, fabricated audio recordings of him allegedly admitting to fraud, and coordinated harassment of Riley's school and tutoring programs. "Mr. Grant, we have credible intelligence that Blackwell's organization has hired former intelligence operatives to conduct systematic reputation destruction while preparing for potential physical elimination of key witnesses," Special Agent Lisa Hoffman reported during their emergency briefing. "Are we talking about continued harassment or actual murder attempts?" Xavier asked, his voice steady despite terror at realizing that his decision to expose corporate fraud had escalated into life-or-death confrontation with international criminal syndicate. "We're talking about elimination of witnesses who pose existential threats to criminal operations worth hundreds of millions of dollars annually," Agent Hoffman replied. "These people have killed federal witnesses before, and they have resources to continue targeting your family indefinitely unless we can arrest their entire network." The conversation was taking place while Riley was at her supervised therapy session, but Xavier understood that he would soon face the impossible task of explaining to his daughter that their lives were in immediate danger because he had chosen to prevent fraud rather than maintain profitable silence. Meanwhile, Natalie was experiencing her own confrontation with criminal retaliation as Blackwell's associates launched coordinated attacks against Pinnacle Publishing's reputation, financial systems, and key personnel through methods that included cyber warfare, regulatory harassment, and systematic sabotage designed to destroy the company whose CEO had cooperated with federal investigators. "Xavier," Natalie said during their encrypted video conference, her face showing the stress of managing a company under siege while worrying about the safety of the man whose expertise had prevented her financial ruin. "They've launched cyber attacks that have compromised our customer databases, filed spurious lawsuits in 4 states, and orchestrated media campaigns that are destroying our reputation in the publishing industry." "Indeed. Natalie, what kind of support are you getting from federal authorities?" Xavier asked, recognizing that witness protection was meaningless if the criminal organization succeeded in destroying the companies and individuals whose testimony threatened their operations. "The FBI says they're working on it, but Blackwell's associates have legal and technological resources that seem to exceed law enforcement capabilities for rapid response," Natalie replied, her voice carrying desperation about whether legitimate business could survive confrontation with sophisticated criminal syndicate. "What about employee safety and company operations? We've had to implement corporate security measures that make normal business operations almost impossible, and several key employees have resigned because they're afraid of being targeted for association with our investigation." The economic warfare was both comprehensive and effective, demonstrating that criminal organizations possessed resources for destroying legitimate businesses through methods that circumvented traditional legal protections for whistleblowers and cooperating witnesses. Natalie, I need to tell you something about my decision to expose Jonathan's crimes, Xavier said, his voice carrying the gravity of moral reckoning that had been building throughout months of witness protection. If I had known that my testimony would put your company and my daughter at risk for this long, I'm not sure I would have made the same choice. What do you mean? I mean that protecting Riley is my primary responsibility, and continued witness protection combined with systematic harassment is traumatizing her in ways that might cause permanent psychological damage, Xavier replied, articulating fears that had been growing as their security situation remained unresolved. Xavier, are you considering withdrawing your testimony? Natalie asked, her voice reflecting understanding that individual courage had limits when children's well-being was at stake. I'm considering whether my moral obligation to expose fraud justifies continued endangerment of my daughter's mental health and physical safety, Xavier replied. The conversation was interrupted by Riley's early return from therapy, accompanied by Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the child psychologist who had been monitoring her adjustment to witness protection and systematic harassment. Mr. Grant, Dr. Walsh said, Riley has been experiencing severe anxiety responses related to the online harassment, including panic attacks at school and regression to earlier developmental behaviors that indicate significant psychological distress. Dad, I don't want to be scared anymore, Riley said, settling beside him with the directness that characterized children who had learned that adult promises about safety were often wrong. Can we make the bad people stop saying mean things about our family? The question forced Xavier to confront that his daughter's emotional well-being was being destroyed by his decision to challenge criminal power, regardless of the moral justification for exposing systematic fraud. Riley, the police are working to arrest all the people who are trying to hurt us, but it's taking longer than we hoped because the bad people have lots of money and helpers, Xavier replied, using honest uncertainty rather than false reassurance. What if the police can't stop them? What if we have to live like this forever? Riley asked, her questions revealing anxiety about permanent displacement and harassment that was affecting her ability to imagine normal childhood development. Sweetheart, we won't have to live like this forever, but I might need to make some difficult decisions about how much I can help the police if helping them means you can't feel safe or happy. The admission represented Xavier's recognition that parental responsibility might require abandoning justice for broader community in favor of protecting his immediate family from ongoing psychological trauma. Dad, would it be okay if you decided to stop helping the police so we could go back to normal life and I could go back to regular school? Riley asked, her question representing mature understanding that her father faced impossible choices between family protection and public service. As Xavier prepared to make the most difficult decision of his life, whether to continue testimony that could result in life sentences for dangerous criminals or prioritize Riley's psychological well-being over justice for thousands of fraud victims, he realized that some confrontations with institutional corruption required sacrifices that extended far beyond individual career consequences to fundamental questions about parental obligation and moral responsibility. Agent Hoffman, Xavier said during their final consultation before his scheduled grand jury appearance, I need to know whether federal authorities can provide sufficient protection and timeline certainty to justify continued witness participation, or whether protecting Riley requires strategic withdrawal from testimony that could prevent other families from experiencing fraud. Mr. Grant, I understand your concerns about your daughter's well-being, but your testimony is crucial for preventing ongoing criminal operations that could victimize thousands of additional families, Agent Hoffman replied, acknowledging the impossible choice between individual family protection and broader community safety. How long before this investigation concludes and we can return to normal life? That depends partly on how comprehensive your testimony is and whether we can use your evidence to build cases against the entire criminal network rather than just individual defendants. As Xavier weighed his daughter's immediate psychological needs against his obligation to prevent systematic fraud that could destroy other families' financial security, he understood that some moral choices required accepting that there might not be solutions that protected everyone who deserved protection. Some confrontations with criminal power require recognizing that individual courage has limits determined by responsibilities to vulnerable dependents, and that the most ethical choice might involve strategic retreat rather than continued resistance when resistance threatens those we're most obligated to protect. 18 months after Jonathan Blackwell and 19 associates received federal sentences ranging from 20 to 45 years for racketeering, fraud, and conspiracy to commit witness intimidation, Chief Strategy Officer Xavier Grant stood in Pinnacle Publishing's new Pattern Recognition Training Center, teaching a cohort of corporate executives strategic analysis techniques that had become industry standards following the Blackwell prosecution and subsequent regulatory reforms. The analytical methods we're reviewing today, Xavier explained to an audience of CFOs and security directors, are designed to help you identify systematic fraud and criminal infiltration before they can compromise your business operations and expose your companies to federal prosecution. At 11 years old, Riley sat in the training room's family area, working on advanced chess tactics while simultaneously coding a mobile app, her presence representing both the stability they had rebuilt and her ongoing preference for staying near her father during work hours that had developed through successful processing of witness protection trauma. "Mr. Grant," asked Margaret Thompson from Sterling Media, "how do you balance comprehensive fraud detection with maintaining trust and positive workplace culture among honest employees?" The question reflected ongoing tension between security requirements and employee morale that had characterized corporate adoption of enhanced surveillance and analysis protocols. Ms. Thompson, what we've learned is that transparent fraud prevention actually improves workplace trust by ensuring that all employees are protected from criminal colleagues who could destroy their careers and livelihoods through illegal activities, Xavier replied, his response based on 18 months of consulting with companies implementing systematic pattern recognition training. The goal isn't suspicion. It's creating analytical frameworks that make criminal behavior detectable before it can cause massive damage to innocent people. Natalie, now wearing the confident demeanor of someone whose near catastrophe had transformed into industry leadership in corporate fraud prevention, observed this exchange with satisfaction that combined business success with personal growth and ongoing commitment to supporting both Xavier's professional development and Riley's psychological recovery. Since the Blackwell prosecution, Pinnacle Publishing had become the premier consulting firm for strategic analysis and fraud prevention across multiple industries, generating over $95 million in annual revenue, while helping hundreds of companies avoid criminal infiltration that could have resulted in federal prosecution and financial collapse. Xavier, Natalie said during the networking break following his presentation, the Department of Justice has requested that we develop pattern recognition curricula for federal law enforcement training. Are you interested in that level of government consulting? The opportunity represented both professional recognition and potential exposure to high-profile cases that could create ongoing security concerns for his family. Natalie, I'm honored by the request, but I need to consider how federal consulting visibility might affect Riley's sense of security and our ability to maintain the therapeutic routine that's been essential for her recovery from harassment and intimidation. Xavier replied. What kind of considerations are you thinking about? Public visibility as a federal consultant could make me a target for other criminal organizations, and continued involvement in high-stakes cases might trigger anxiety responses in Riley that could affect her social development and academic progress. The concerns reflected hard-won wisdom about balancing professional purpose with family well-being that had developed through experiencing both the rewards and devastating costs of confronting organized criminal enterprises. Meanwhile, Dr. Evelyn Martinez was conducting her annual assessment of psychological recovery and institutional change that had emerged from the Blackwell case, documenting healing and organizational transformation that had exceeded initial projections. Xavier, Dr. Martinez said during their consultation meeting, Riley's recovery from witness protection trauma has been remarkable, and your pattern recognition training methods have been adopted by over 300 companies, resulting in prevention of an estimated $400 million in potential fraud losses. The impact was both personally meaningful and professionally validating, demonstrating that individual courage had catalyzed systematic changes that protected thousands of families and businesses, rather than just addressing isolated criminal cases. Dr. Martinez, what I've discovered is that preventing sophisticated criminal infiltration requires institutionalizing analytical expertise rather than relying on individual heroes to identify and report suspicious activity, Xavier said. The goal is making pattern recognition so routine that criminal organizations can't find companies naive enough to become unwitting partners in fraud schemes. How has this approach affected your family's recovery from the investigation experience? It's allowed us to contribute to crime prevention without exposing ourselves to the kind of direct retaliation that made normal life impossible for over a year, Xavier replied. Riley feels secure knowing that my work helps protect people without putting us in immediate danger. As their conversation continued, Riley was participating in Pinnacle Publishing's Youth Strategic Thinking program, which taught children of employees analytical problem-solving while providing them with intellectual challenges that most schools couldn't offer. "Dad," Riley said, as they prepared to leave the office after her completion of the chess and coding workshop, "I think I want to study strategic analysis and business ethics in college, so I can help companies make good decisions that protect people from thieves." The aspiration represented both intellectual interest and emotional processing of their family's experience with criminal retaliation and successful recovery through collaborative support systems. "Riley, you have the analytical skills and moral clarity to succeed in strategic consulting if that's what you decide to pursue," Xavier replied, using the supportive communication style he'd developed for encouraging her interests without creating pressure about specific career choices. "And if I become a strategic analyst, I'll already understand that catching bad people sometimes requires courage that can be scary, but that having good people help you makes it possible to do the right thing safely." The insight reflected mature understanding of moral decision-making and collaborative support that had developed through witnessing her father's choices and their positive resolution through institutional change rather than individual heroism. 6 months later, Xavier stood in the kitchen of the 6-bedroom house in suburban Denver that his promotion and consulting fees had made affordable, preparing dinner while reviewing materials for the Harvard Business School Executive Education Program in Strategic Pattern Recognition that he would teach the following semester. "Dad," Riley called from the living room where she was working on a school project about business ethics and social responsibility, "can you help me understand why some people choose to steal money instead of working honestly to earn it?" The question was both academic assignment and personal inquiry about criminal psychology that had affected their family's life. Riley, most people who commit sophisticated fraud aren't motivated by simple greed, Xavier explained, joining her at the dining room table where her project materials included case studies of various corporate crime prevention programs. They're often motivated by desire for power, status, or control that they believe they can't achieve through legitimate means. So they're not just trying to get money, they're trying to feel important. That's exactly right, sweetheart. And that's why preventing corporate crime requires understanding psychology, as well as analyzing financial patterns, because criminal behavior often reflects emotional needs that can't be satisfied through stealing. McGeady, as they worked together on homework that combined academic learning with personal experience, both Xavier and Riley understood that their family's transformation represented more than individual recovery. It demonstrated that systematic change was possible when individual expertise was supported by collaborative commitment to protecting rather than exploiting vulnerable populations. Xavier, Natalie said during their quarterly business review, I want to discuss international expansion of our strategic analysis consulting to help multinational corporations prevent the kind of systematic infiltration that nearly destroyed our company. Are you interested in global impact work that could protect businesses worldwide? The growth opportunity was both remarkable business development and recognition that their work had created analytical expertise that could protect institutional integrity globally rather than just domestically. Natalie, I'm interested in international impact, but I want to ensure that our expansion maintains focus on collaborative education rather than individual heroism, and that any global work includes security protocols that protect our families from retaliation by criminal organizations with international reach. Some families, they had discovered, were strengthened rather than destroyed by confronting institutional corruption when their courage was supported by systems designed to protect and amplify rather than isolate those who chose analytical expertise over willful ignorance and collaborative justice over profitable complicity. This story reminds us that true intelligence exists independently of social recognition, and that the most sophisticated crimes often succeed through exploiting our assumptions about competence and trustworthiness. In a world where criminal organizations use legitimate institutions to conceal systematic fraud, Xavier and Natalie's partnership shows us that effective protection requires recognizing expertise wherever it's found, while understanding that sustainable justice emerges from collaborative institutional change, rather than individual heroism. Sometimes the most profound victories happen when personal expertise catalyzes systematic education that prevents entire communities from experiencing the kind of victimization that destroys families and dreams. What patterns of behavior might you be missing in your organization because you're making assumptions about people based on their job titles rather than their actual capabilities? How could systematic analytical training help protect your institution from sophisticated criminal infiltration?